Thank you for viewing this module today to practice applying the hospital to school transition process to a sample student. Before we start, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Catherine Doherty Kurtz. I'm a school psychologist and project director of the BIRCh Project. I grew up here in Massachusetts and currently live in Boston. Before beginning with our content, I would like to introduce the BIRCh Project to those of you joining us for the first time for this module series. The BIRCh Project is the Behavioral Health Integrated Resources for Children project. Its mission is to provide professional development and resources for schools, as well as to strengthen coordination of behavioral health supports across school and community agencies. The BIRCh Project is led by faculty members from UMass Boston and UMass Amherst, and is sponsored by Boston Children's Hospital. For more information, please check out our website at umb.edu/birch. Let me introduce you to another sample student. Jaden is an 8-year-old boy who attends a large urban public school district in MA. He identifies as male and African American. His strengths include math, art, his desire to interact with others, friendliness, and a sense of humor. He also has a history of trauma, including disrupted attachment and witnessing domestic violence. He has a history of struggling with self-regulation dating back to early childhood as well. Recently, his behaviors have increased in intensity and severity, and he has displayed physical aggression, object aggression, and verbal aggression toward adults and other children. The school recently conducted a special education evaluation, and he was deemed eligible for services under emotional impairment. He currently receives resource room support for reading and self-regulation skills. His DCF worker placed him on a wait list for individual and family therapy at a community agency approximately 3 months ago. He currently receives case management support from an intensive care coordinator and is prescribed a stimulant from his pediatrician. During a recent incident at school, he was asked to complete a reading assessment and eloped from the classroom. Staff followed him and he began flipping chairs, telling staff he was going to kill himself and that he wished he was dead, and took off his shoelace and tried to tie it around his neck. Staff attempted to de-escalate Jaden for over 2 hours. His foster parents picked him up from school and brought him to the emergency room. He was discharged home to his foster parents, but was then admitted to a Community Based Acute Treatment program, or CBAT, where he spent 10 days. He is now expected to return to school following his discharge from CBAT. His foster parents and school staff are increasingly concerned about his safety and the safety of his peers. Since equity and social justice need to be at the forefront of all of our decision-making around intervention planning and supports for our students, we have included some possible questions to guide our collaboration as a team. For Jaden, we want to consider the impact of his trauma history on his current challenges. How is this trauma history impacting his current functioning? What role does it play in Jaden being triggered across settings? How can school staff engage in trauma-sensitive prevention as well as crisis response strategies? How can we minimize his triggers and build in opportunities for Jaden to experience predictable, consistent connections with stable and regulated adults across settings? What support do Jaden's foster parents need in supporting a child with a trauma history? What support do Jaden's foster parents need in securing needed mental health services for Jaden? What barriers are they coming across? Are there economic challenges, insurance challenges? How can we support Jaden's foster parents in navigating communication across systems and helping to integrate supports and services? Jaden identifies as an African-American male. Much of his team does not identify as African-American or male. How do the identities of the team members impact perceptions of Jaden's behaviors? How has Jaden's identity impacted his access to culturally responsive and needed services across domains? What protective factors and strengths do Jaden and his foster parents have that can help buffer against chronic stress and systemic racism? Multidisciplinary teaming and collaboration with providers across disciplines and of varying identities and backgrounds becomes critical here as we hold each other accountable for our views, biases we hold, and determine as a team how we try to best support Jaden and his foster parents. Here is the team meeting and intervention monitoring timeline for Jaden over the course of approximately 16 weeks. The next slides will focus on the team makeup and the timeline of meetings and intervention implementation. It will also discuss examples of interventions implemented and ideas for monitoring progress. Much more detail around specifics is included in the example of a completed hospital to school transition protocol for Jaden. The first phase of the hospital to school transition is around planning for the Welcome Back team meeting and obtaining input from the hospital program. In Jaden's school, the school social worker is the point person responsible for initiating the hospital to school transition process. The school social worker first coordinates with the school-based team to decide on next steps for setting up a Welcome Back team meeting. Who is going to collaborate with school staff, which in this case is the CBAT team, who is going to contact the DCF worker and the foster parents, who is going to contact the intensive care coordinator and coordinate gathering information needed for the Welcome Back team meeting. Before Jaden returns to school, the team decides that the school social worker will contact CBAT staff to determine if they can attend a Welcome Back team meeting for Jaden. The school social worker also speaks with the CBAT staff about completing the hospital to school accommodations checklist collaboratively beforehand to review as a team upon Jaden's return to school. Jaden received CBAT treatment for 10 days. Therefore, the school team will need to collaborate with DCF to obtain permission and signatures for releases of information prior to obtaining CBAT records and speaking with the CBAT team, and to ensure they have a release to exchange information with Jaden's intensive care coordinator. Once releases of information are signed and returned, school and CBAT staff should work collaboratively to fill out the hospital to school accommodations checklist. This can be done through phone, a virtual meeting, or an in-person meeting. Discuss what types of accommodations the CBAT team put in place to support Jaden during his treatment, and their insight into which supports would be most beneficial for the school setting. Using these insights, school-based team members can discuss which supports can be feasibly implemented throughout the school day. The school social worker has had contact with Jaden's DCF worker and foster parents. So the school-based team makes a plan for him to reach out to Jaden's DCF worker and foster parents to share about the hospital to school transition meeting process, including the purpose of the meeting as to plan the best ways to support Jaden as he transitions back from his absence. Before the meeting, he will be in touch with Jaden's DCF worker and foster parents about the best plan for communication and address any needs for immediate support. Based on the involvement of DCF and his foster parents, the team needs to determine the most efficient way to streamline communication so everyone has the information they need, but also eliminating the need for anyone to contact multiple individuals whenever possible. In preparation for the Welcome Back team meeting, the school social worker fills out the hospital to school transition protocol, with as much information as possible, collaborating with other team members as necessary. Jaden is on the wait list for individual outpatient therapy and in-home therapy, as well as potentially the support of a family partner and therapeutic mentor. The school social worker will contact Jaden's intensive care coordinator to see if they need any information from school to support in obtaining these services for Jaden. In the case of Jaden's school-based team includes the assistant principal, his special education case manager, his general education classroom teacher, nurse, school social worker, and school psychologist. Additionally, because of Jaden's strengths in art, the team has decided to involve the art teacher in intervention planning for Jaden. Not all of these individuals will be available to attend the Welcome Back team meeting. So the team prioritizes attendance of the school social worker, assistant principal, special education case manager, and general education classroom teacher. Jaden's biological mother has supervised visitation with Jaden, but cannot visit Jaden at school, cannot sign off on educational decision-making, or receive information about his whereabouts or educational or mental health records if she calls the school. Based on Jaden's age, he will not participate in the entire Welcome Back team meeting, but will join toward the end of the meeting to review the plan. Jaden will complete the youth action plan with the school psychologist during the beginning of the meeting, and then the school psychologist and Jaden will join for a brief period of time at the end of the meeting. The team has decided before this morning to gradually work Jaden up to full days of school. So after the meeting, Jaden's foster parents take him to their home for the remainder of the day. It is decided he will arrive at school after the ELA block in the morning and stay through the remainder of the day. His foster parents feel this will decrease the trigger of the loudness of the school bus in the morning, and the school team feels this will help Jaden transition back to school focused on his math and art strengths. The school team reconvenes after school to complete the hospital to school transition protocol and supplemental documents to outline where Jaden is at in the phases of hospital to school transition and what interventions are most likely to effectively support his transition back to school. The team will complete the phases of hospital to school transition document and the team action plan. The team reviews the accommodations suggested by the CBAT team. The school social worker completes the family handout following the meeting based on the interventions developed and then sends it to Jaden's foster parents and DCF worker. At the end of the meeting, the next meeting date is set for 8 weeks, and the social worker communicates this next meeting date to the DCF worker and foster parents following the meeting. At this stage, the transition plan involving academic, behavioral, and mental health interventions will be implemented. Communication will consistently occur with Jaden's ICC, as well as his foster parents and DCF worker. Overall, the team decides to minimize reading demands across settings and focus on transitioning Jaden back to school, utilizing his math strengths and preferred interest area of art. Reading will gradually be introduced using audiobooks and watching videos of books on an iPad. Reading assessment in the classroom will be paused until Jaden has been able to develop more coping skills to use when he is overwhelmed. Jaden appears to be triggered when he is asked to read in front of peers, so this demand will be minimized. Additionally, Jaden's behavioral health supports will include built-in breaks throughout the school day, including the use of first, then, with completing brief amounts of academic work and then being able to engage in a preferred activity with the assistant principal, behavior support team member, art teacher, special education teacher, or in his general education classroom, depending on an established schedule of which staff member is available at that time. Built-in time on the schedule for Jaden to engage in a preferred art activity with the art teacher to support his transition after recess. Jaden will also be able to show a visual to ask for a break from his general education classroom. The general education classroom teacher will call the main office to let them know Jaden needs a staff member to accompany him to a safe space, which is an alcove near the main office. While Jaden is waiting for a staff member, he can use tools from his coping toolbox, such as fidgets, coloring, Velcro, to try to help himself regulate. Jaden will bring his coping toolbox to his safe space. The school social worker will change the items in Jaden's coping toolbox weekly. Also, 2 20-minute counseling sessions per week with the school social worker using a trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy approach will be used to support Jaden in working on identifying emotions, practicing his coping skills, understanding upsetting events, processing his traumatic experiences, and communicating his needs and wants adaptively. The school social worker will regularly share the psychoeducation and skills components of TF-CBT that Jaden is working on during counseling, so his foster parents are aware of language being used and strategies he is learning. Team members will continue to use consistent and predictable trauma-informed language with Jaden, such as reminders that he is safe and that grown-ups are here to help, reminders that it feels better to learn, and that he can do hard things. Communication will include weekly communication by the school psychologist to Jaden's intensive care coordinator, weekly communication to his foster parents and DCF worker by the school social worker by email. Jaden's intensive care coordinator will continue to support Jaden's foster parents and navigating referrals for individual outpatient and in-home therapy. The school social worker will share support and resources in supporting children impacted by trauma, such as domestic violence exposure, and in supporting Jaden in coping with the unknowns around the timing of foster care placement. The crisis/de-escalation plan to support Jaden will include one preferred staff member who Jaden has identified as a safe person being in close proximity while at Jaden's level, using a slow and low voice, offering Jaden safe space and his coping toolbox. Avoid referencing the trigger or attempting to process the event at that time. Do not mention calling his parents, as this can be a trigger for Jaden. If peers are around, encourage Jaden to walk to a more private space if it is available. In terms of academic supports, Jaden's special education teacher will provide rules-based reading instruction. Jaden's general education teacher will make sure Jaden's foster parents can access the online programs the class uses for math and reading instruction so Jaden can practice at home when he's regulated. Jaden will not be expected to make up academic assignments he missed while he was absent. The focus will instead be on providing practice opportunities in reading and math as much as possible across settings to build his reading skills and his confidence. Jaden's general education teacher will encourage Jaden's foster parents to read aloud nightly to Jaden. Refer to Jaden's sample completed protocol for more details around interventions. Here's an example of an intervention grid with the interventions including care coordination, outlined, including how often the intervention should be implemented, the person responsible for implementing, and data to monitor to help the team evaluate Jaden's response to interventions being implemented. For the team to know Jaden was responding to the interventions, they would see a positive trend related to time on task, as shown by the number of minutes during weekly observation by the school psychologist during an academic task, a positive trend related to daily behavior rating data, increase in the frequency of the number of safe transitions, and pre and post FAST 3 parent and teacher ratings. After 8 weeks, the team reconvenes to discuss Jaden's progress in addition to next steps. The school social worker obtains releases of information and permission from Jaden's DCF worker to communicate with Jaden's new outpatient and family therapist. While data was inconsistent during the first 4 weeks of intervention implementation, intervention data suggests an overall positive trend. The team decides to continue intervention implementation for another 8 weeks and continue Jaden's shortened day. The team makes a plan to meet in 8 weeks to discuss Jaden's response to intervention and reassess the need for a shortened day. At that time, the IEP team will consider any changes needed to Jaden's IEP goals and minutes of service. The team meets 8 weeks later and discusses Jaden's response to intervention, need for a shortened school day, and any changes needed to his IEP. Please refer to Jaden's completed protocol for more specifics around this example case. This tool should be utilized in the manner that is most responsive, relevant, and feasible for your school community. The BIRCh team recognizes the limitations of and the negative impact language can have on perpetuating inequitable systems. Please feel free to rename the titles of the documents and make other adjustments in language throughout the protocol if your team feels it would be more culturally responsive to the needs of your school community and the youth you are serving. Thank you for listening and for your work in supporting children, families, and schools. Please complete an evaluation of this module by visiting the link on this slide. We would greatly value your feedback. Thank you for viewing this module to learn more about supporting students who are transitioning back to school from psychiatric hospitalization. We want to thank you for your time and attention to the behavioral health needs of students. At our website, umb.edu/birch, you can sign up for our subscription list to get more information on best practices, such as supporting the hospital to school transition process. We would love to hear from you. Please reach out to us with thoughts or questions. We hope you view the rest of our modules on the hospital to school transition process as your team is building your capacity for supporting students with intensive behavioral health needs. Take care, and thank you again for all your work to support our students.